Okay, continuing on with our basics of the Torah. The last time we talked about the two tablets being two copies of the same thing because it is a treaty between God and man. And now we want to look at why is it written on both sides, okay? So let's look at the uh, Ten Commandments. And what you're going to see is you got two tablets, both are the same. You got the first 5 commandments on the front side, and on the back side, you've got the last 5 commandments. Okay. Um, and I'm working in precedence of Torah commands. And there is a nice little chart in here in this chapter on the structure of the Ten Commandments that talks about, it has the Ten Commandments written in precedence order. In other words, it's going front to back and top to bottom. So what that means is that the first commandment is on the front at the top, so it is the number 1 commandment. You have no other gods before me. Then the second commandment in precedence order is actually the 6th commandment because it's on the back side. Okay, so you've got number 1 is at the top, and then you turn to the back side, and the next commandment in precedence order is number 6, which is murder. Okay? Now, murder has to do with life. So, life, dealing with murder, is the second highest priority in the law. We gave an example of the disciples eating on Shabbat. They're picking the grain in the field to eat on Shabbat. And we said that that was a precedence order, that life takes precedence over ceremony. Well, if you go down here to number 4 on the front side, this is actually the 7th commandment in priority sense, and this is Shabbat. Okay, so Shabbat is number 7, but life is number 2. So life takes precedence over Shabbat, and this is well documented in the Talmud. It's well known within Jewish circles. But what they don't know is this whole precedence system that comes from the Ten Commandments. Okay? So if we follow the precedence order that is written on your little chart here, you will see that number 1 is no other gods. That's idolatry. And number 2 is actually idolatry also. And so it's going to have all of your same issues. Anytime that you make an image to worship, you're also putting something else before God. So if you ever violate the 2nd commandment, you are also violating the 1st commandment. So idolatry of any form is always going to come above murder. Okay, and that is why idolatry you have to execute the person, and you cannot mitigate the punishment down. You have to execute him. Okay, murder also, you cannot change the sentence to a fine. You have to execute the person. So anything murder or idolatry, you have to execute the person, because executing a person is killing somebody, right? So that is a sin. okay? But because of the fact that something else is taking precedence over it, then you have to go ahead and do that. So, because it doesn't say don't murder, it says don't kill, right? Uh, and it's just a normal word in Hebrew for killing. So executing a criminal is violating that commandment. So the only way that you would not violate that commandment is if everybody was doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing. But when people sin, then you have this precedence issue. And there's a whole bunch of examples in the Torah or in the Bible that deal with this precedence issue. Marriage is a very interesting example of this. If you look on here, number 5 in precedence order is taking the name in vain, which is number 3 on the front side. Okay, and so taking the name in vain would include vows. You're supposed to be representing God, so that means you're supposed to be a responsible person. As a responsible person, whatever you promise, whatever you contract to do, you have to do that, okay? But there are issues that are above that that would cause you to break that vow. So if you have a marriage vow, a marriage covenant, okay, then there are only certain things that would obligate you to break that vow. And Yeshua was asked this question: can we divorce someone just because we don't like them or because of adultery? And they were asking that question very specifically because in Deuteronomy 24 it says that if you don't like your wife because she has an uncleanness, then you divorce her by giving her a document of divorce. Okay, so the question was, can you divorce her for just for adultery, or can you also divorce her because you don't like her? Okay, and Yeshua weighed in and he said it's because of adultery. Okay, but what he meant by that, if we understand this precedence issue, is adultery and above. Because if you look at the chart, okay, then number 5 is taking your name in vain. That is the vow, okay? So that's so you have to keep the vow at number 5. But anything above that, number 4 is adultery, okay? But number 3 is idolatry. Number 2 is murder. So these things also are reasons to get divorced. Solomon was told to divorce his wives for idolatry. Okay? Same thing in Ezra. The people who had married idolatrous wives were told to divorce them. Divorce is breaking a vow. Okay? But idolatry takes precedence over that. Same with murder. If you have a murder situation, for example, if the guy kills the wife, then that takes precedence over the vow, right? You're no longer obligated to keep the vow of marriage. Of course, you're going to be executed for that, so you're not going to have to worry about it. But the point is that if you have a situation where there is a threat of murder, which there is in the case of physical abuse, then that is a reason for divorce, okay, because it falls under the threat of murder. And so, because physical abuse always escalates, unless it gets fixed, it's going to escalate. And so that is a valid reason for divorce. Now, so there's a whole bunch of examples of how these things fit into Scripture. When the children of Israel in the book of Daniel were faced with following a false god, which was idolatry, they were willing to die for that. Okay, same with Daniel. When he went to the lion's den, he was faced with an issue of praying to an idol. Okay, and he was willing to go to the lion's den. Why? Because idolatry takes precedence over murder. But on the other hand, when Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego were dealing with a diet issue, and they went to the guy in charge and they said, hey, we want to do our kosher diet, the biblical diet, they were not willing to die for that issue. Okay, and so instead they made a deal and they said, hey, let's make a deal. If we'll try ours for a little while and you guys keep doing your diet for a little while, and we'll see who is healthier looking. Okay, if we're looking healthier than the other guys, then we'll keep with our diet, and if you guys are looking healthier than us, then we'll go with your diet. Okay, so they made a deal about this. They were not willing to die for it. Why? Because murder is number 2. But the issue here was not idolatry. The issue was ceremony. Number 7, which is Shabbat. So diet falls under that. It's a ceremonial issue. And they were not willing to die for it because they understood this precedence issue. Now there's a whole bunch of examples in the book that you will want to go through at your leisure and see how the Bible supports this thing. But if you understand this chart and you are faced with a situation where you have to sin one way or another because of the evil world that we're in, this chart tells you exactly which one you should go on. Without this chart, you have to decide for yourself. You have to make it up in your own head. And we figure out this stuff very poorly. Okay? We have our own ideas about what is more important than other things, right? So we make all kinds of wacky decisions. So we don't want to leave it up to our own brain. We want to use the scripture to tell us exactly which way to go on these decisions. So take a look at this chart and the examples that are in the scripture and see how they fit together, and let that inform you about these kinds of decisions. Because of the evil world that we're in, we're going to run into these kind of decisions a lot. Now, of course, the ideal is where you don't sin either way. And there is a lot of things that we can do to avoid getting into a situation like this. Okay? So that's what we want to do primarily. We want to figure out a way so that we can do both. And that is certainly possible in a lot of situations if we use our brain a little bit and the wisdom of God to come up with solutions. Okay? But there's going to also be a lot of situations where there is no solution like that, and we're going to have to decide between one or the other. And if we use this chart, okay, the precedence of commands that is built into the 10 Commandments, then we can know that we're making the right decision. Okay? Precedence of commands. Very important, because without this, people are doing all kinds of stupid stuff. There was a story in Judges where the guy made a vow. He says, if you help me, God, if you help me to win this battle, then the first thing that comes out of my door when I get back home, I'm going to sacrifice it to you. And then his daughter came out, right? So what does he do? He sacrifices her. Okay, why? Because he's an idiot. Okay? Because in the precedence of commands, life takes precedence over vows. So he should have broken his vow and not sacrificed her. But instead, because he doesn't understand precedence of vows, because in the book of Judges, you got a bunch of people that don't know the Torah, he makes the wrong decision. And when we make the wrong decision about the Torah, we can either go do something really stupid, or we can say, hey, the Torah is telling me to do something stupid, so I'm going to throw out the Torah. Either way is a bad thing. So we need to make sure that we are doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing by following precedence of commands, and then we're not doing stupid stuff or going away from the Torah. Very important.